Grandmaster Mike is back to show you something that I cannot do, which is how to beat Hikaru Nakamura. But today I'm not giving the lesson, Tani is giving the lesson. This is the second game in which Tani has beaten Hikaru. Probably you already saw the first one where he used some good endgame technique. In this one, he had to navigate, again, some complicated tactics. That's the thing against Hikaru. Even once you get a small lead, he's still going to make your life very difficult. It's a hallmark of any strong player. Now, out of the opening, Tani already won a pawn. Let's take a look here. Tani was white, and in this Scandinavian defense, played knight to e5. Take that, Team Scando. And Hikaru already made a mistake. He should probably just, I don't know, develop or push h6 or h5 or go on the attack or something. But instead, Hikaru took. Well, it seems very natural, right? Getting rid of the strong knight in the middle of the board. The problem is, after rook takes, there is suddenly very few places to put your queen. In fact, by very few, I mean two. Now, Hikaru could have put his queen here. It's one of the rare times I would have given Tani permission to move his f-pawn. Not literally, I can't help Tani in the middle of his game, but you get the point. It's one of the few times where pushing the pawn is probably okay. And if you try to hide the queen on this square, well then some really bad things are happening after bishop to g5. Your queen has to go back here and line up with my rook, and Tani would play bishop takes knight. And then the whole world would say, who is playing on Hikaru's account? Okay, yeah, there's no way that Hikaru would do that. So instead, Hikaru buried the queen on g6, but then Tani, quite correctly, realized, hey, different discovered attack is coming. Let's play the move rook to g5. Your queen only has one move. Now, I guess he could have maybe moved his rook back and forth and gone for a perpetual, but that is not the little man's style. Because when you have a chance to beat one of the best blitz players of all time, you take it, okay? By the way, we are kind of being a little bit selective here. We're not showing Hikaru's 25 or 30 wins against Tani. Those are to be expected, but we're going to celebrate the boy wonder here. He found a weakness in Black's camp, saw that this pawn on b7 wasn't guarded, and played rook to b5. Discovered attack on the queen, winning a pawn. But that is just the beginning of the hard work. After the queen moves, he won a pawn, but you can believe that Hikaru threw all of his pieces at the white king. And let's just fast forward to the point where the kitchen sink was about to fall on Tani's head. So I'm going to fast forward, and we arrive at this position 22 moves later. Now, Tani has increased his advantage, so to speak. He's not actually up as much material, but he has a bishop and two very strong pass pawns against some rooks that are just playing defense. And Hikaru decided to get that kitchen sink going and play the move h4. Very, very surprising winning move here for Tani. If you can find it at first glance, maybe you've used some outside assistance. No, I'm not going to impugn you, dear viewer. I'm just going to assume that you're a grandmaster if you found this move. White should actually ignore all of the attack on his own king and just get rid of this rook defense and play the very simple rook a7. And all White's trying to do is trade rooks to weaken the back rank. Obviously, if Black takes, you could take this rook with check and then take the other rook with your bishop. And if Black does nothing, well, then you'll just take Black's rook, and when he takes back, you can promote your pawn or even play the fancy queen to d8. The point is, you're just using your rook to get rid of one of the defensive rooks, okay? Now, of course, the question becomes, well, what happens if pawn takes, right? Because if you take back this way, then the queen, at the very least, could take, allow you to take, and even though Black's position is one move from complete catastrophe, then perpetual check, right? Queen check, and obviously, it's a draw after queen f1. Okay, let's go back. But after pawn takes pawn check, there is no rule in chess that says you have to capture back. White could actually play the very clever, and it is totally important you pick the right move, king to g2, not king to g1, because pawn takes pawn check further reduces the protection. But if you play king to g2, you will crawl out of the checks. Pretty hard to find in a blitz game though. Here's how things might continue after the move king to g2. For example, queen e4 check. Now you take the pawn. Wasn't allowed before with your king, but now it is. The queen can continue checks, for example, with queen e5. Then you block. She can check one more time, and then you can move your king back to g2. The checks are finally done, and on the next move, Tani will, get rid of the blockader of his passed pawn, and eventually he will win. All right, let's go back to the game. Now, Tani played a move which looks totally reasonable. He won a tempo by playing bishop to f4, and helped safeguard his king, right? That totally makes sense. The problem is he weakened the f2 pawn. And in this position, Hikaru should have played queen to d4. And actually, this is pretty hard for Tani to overcome. Except, the funny thing is, Tani actually could go back, force the queen to go back, and then correct his mistake the second time. That's a tall ask in a blitz game, though. Okay. Instead, let's take a look at what happened in the actual game, which is Hikaru played pawn takes pawn, but now Tani kind of got what he wanted. His bishop took, and he formed that little fortress around his king. Now, it is definitely winning for white, but let's celebrate the little man by showing the closing moves. Black saved the queen. And here, you don't even need to play the move rook a7. Now that your bishop is on this rather sweet diagonal, rook to b8, it does the same thing that we were talking about doing, except a little bit more forcefully by playing rook to b8. So we have the rook Oreo, got the cookies on the outside and the cream in the middle, but only Tani is going to be doing the snacking here. If you take the rook a couple of times, Tani gets a new queen. So Hikaru sacrificed the c rook in pursuit of his own checkmate. Remember, strong players, they always make your life difficult. And now Tani had to find a very specific sequence here to win. Interestingly, I know it looks like queen takes rook wins, right? But when the king goes to h7, this is totally not clear. Because when you check the king from behind, he runs away, and stopping checkmate is not that easy. You can play a couple more checks with your rook, but I'm not sure white's winning anymore. Let's go back. Amazingly, you have to take with the rook. Tani did take with the rook. And when the king moved to h7, can you figure out how white wins this? Well, where there's a will, there's a way. Or in this case, where there's a second queen waiting, there's a way. Tani sacrificed his rook as a clearance sacrifice to be able to get his pawn forward. Now, Hikaru played king to g6, but after queen to g4 check, the queens leave the board and Tani wins. You can see the black king raises the white flag. This is the actual end of the game. What would have happened if Hikaru had captured the rook? Well, then Tani would have said, it's a girl. Queen on c8, and two queens usually defeats one, except for that one video I showed a while back where two queens actually lost the game. But we're not going to talk about that one. We're going to show this one, and Tani would have been able to trade queens in a different fashion here, which would have won him the game in a different way. Well, there you go. If you are ever able to beat Hikaru Nakamura in a game, you would probably frame it on a wall, make an NFT, or do something special. But we have just seen the second win that Tani has had over Hikaru. Maybe he'll end up playing him over the board in a tournament one day. You never know. For more on this exciting journey of, frankly, a kid that you're going to hear a lot more about, make sure you subscribe to the ChessKid YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me. And yeah, let's all go buy Tani t-shirts.
Welcome to my world. Time to attack!
A knight on the rim is grim. Are you sure you know what you're doing?